Yes, Dr. Weria, on to you.
Yes. So welcome everyone to our regular CME. It's been a while, but now we're back. Today, our presenter is Dr. David Nekyon, who is a faculty of anesthesia at the Aga Khan Hospital, and is going to be joined by a panelist, Dr. Zipporah Gathuya, who's a pediatric anesthesiologist. So as usual, if there are any questions or comments, please post them in the chat box, and we're going to go through them at the end of the presentation. So Dr. over to you. You can start.
Okay, thank you. I'm just trying to hang on a bit. Sorry. I think I've lost my, all right. You're able to see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
Okay. All right, thank you. It's a short talk that I hope will just stimulate some discussion. And the issue is about anesthesia being a minor rotation during medical school for undergraduates. And what are the implications for us as a specialty? Oh dear, sorry. I'm sorry, I'm not able to, okay, thank you. Just a bit of background of how this came about is that we, as per the Global Anesthesia Workforce Survey that was done more than 5-6 years ago, the challenge that we face in Africa, no different in Kenya, is to be able to have a physician anesthesia density of 5 specialists per 100,000 of population. But currently, as is, on average, we're only making 0.41 anesthesiologists per 100,000 of the population. And obviously, the talk that we have a lot of is that we need to scale up the number of physician anesthesia providers. But the challenge always remains is, where are we going to find these doctors? How will we be able to recruit these doctors to get them to apply to come into our training programs? And it is not unusual to find a place where there are actually more places for training available than the number of applicants. And that is a really shameful position. And it actually is a compromise, because then we end up taking people who really are not appropriate or who really aren't very interested, just to fill up the numbers. And therefore, we have to ask the question, how will we find the required number of trainees in anesthesia for our present and our future? Normally, and obviously, the recruits to anesthesia training programs come from people who are already finished medical school. It's a very small pool, and they're often medical officers in any country. However, very few of these actually think anesthesia is a first choice. There was a dissertation done in the University of Nairobi by Yasin et al. And only 4.5% of doctors, medical officers at the time, said that they would choose anesthesia as a curriculum, as a specialty. And when you asked second choice, it was 6.6% of doctors. If you said third choice, it was 3.0% of doctors would be interested in anesthesia as a specialty. These findings are no different from anything that you'd find across the rest of the continent amongst medical officers. Nigerians, only 3.1% had any interest in anesthesia as a specialty. And then when you consider, when looking at interns, because that's medical officers I've been talking about, when you look at interns, the thing is not much different. South Africa, where they're quite developed in their medical systems, only 6.8% of these consider anesthesia as a specialty. In Nigeria, it was even worse. Only 1.8% of Nigerian interns showed any interest in specializing in anesthesia. And so you can see the gist of the problem. And the reasons they gave were, anesthetists have long working hours, they have minimal patient contact, they lack recognition by their peers, and there is a perceived dependence on surgeons. When we look at the Yasin study, which was done in 2015, the interns said they had an unpleasant undergraduate rotational experience, or they had none or little exposure to anesthesia as a specialty while in medical school. They also felt that anesthetists work long, inflexible hours and have minimum patient contact, not different from what was summarized in Nigeria and South Africa. Of course, when you and I look at this, we wonder, wow, do anesthetists have very long working hours? I thought that we would have more flexible working hours than anyone else. And as for minimum patient contact, there are bonuses to that, but also we do get very involved with our patients. So what is it that these people are not seeing? But these are already interns. What can we do? The few interns who were interested in anesthesia said, one, they liked the flexible working hours. They said the length of the training program was good, and there was financial reward as an anesthetist. But a bit more worrying is the one where they say the ease of entry into a postgraduate training program is very attractive. It's very easy to get into anesthesia. So that's also something that we need to think about. Is that what we need to be? But you can see that these few saw something that the vast majority did not see. There seems to be a disconnect here. And the fact that they're already interns, we have to ask the question, has anesthesia as a specialty missed the train at this point? Are we now chasing after a group that are already lost, hoping that some of them would be interested in us when the horse has already bolted? So we have to go back and look at the original state. Where do we start, all of us? We start as undergraduate medical students. And then you start seeing the problem that we face. And this is an African problem all across. The undergraduate anesthesia curriculum in most medical schools is listed as a special or a minor rotation, hence the title that I gave my talk. And in some places, it's actually entirely voluntary. So you can choose not to do it. In most medical colleges in Africa, you are lucky if you'll get 2 weeks. In fact, in some places, you may actually only get a 4-day stint in anesthesia. That's how minor it is. And the problem also is that when there are challenges within an annual calendar where the university has to make up time for the majors, they tend to head to the minors like anesthesia, cut their time, and then allocate it elsewhere. So the experience that a medical student will get in this minor anesthesia rotation can be extremely varied. And therefore, what kind of experience do we expect them to get and understand what it is that we do? So if you ask medical students consistently, and across some of the papers that I reviewed, they choose their careers primarily on personal interest, role models, experience during the rotation. They're looking for a better work-life balance. They are looking for financial reward, obviously, and to a lesser extent on intellectual content, job satisfaction, and job opportunities. That is what they're looking for. Now, when you take that all into account, we don't do very well. So this is a slew of papers that have looked at medical students and basically asked them about their career choices. And here you can see at the column second to the end, to the right, from the right, anesthesia as a first choice or as the only choice does very, very poorly. South Africa does the best at 8%, and imagine that's in a really well-developed situation. Overall, you can see it's less than 1% to about 2.5%. And this is across South Africa, Gambia, Ghana, Nigeria, and Rwanda as well. And that is the challenge again. It goes back to how many people will we later on expect to show any interest if at the undergraduate level, they've already switched off. When we look at a paper done at the University of Nairobi in 2016 by Dosaji et al., when they were asked as a first preference, only 5.6% of female candidates, final year medical students, said they would be interested in doing anesthesia as a rotation. No male resident that year expressed any interest. And that gave over an overall, these were 200 medical students, 100 female and 100 male. So out of 200 medical students, only 4 showed an interest in anesthesia as a first choice. As a second choice, the number went up slightly to 9 out of 200 medical students would be interested in anesthesia as a second choice. So already we were on the back foot, and that's in Kenya. 58%, of course, chose the usual suspects, which are pediatrics, obstetrics, gynecology, and internal medicine. And the reason? Surgery, because of its prestige. Internal medicine, because they felt it was good earning potentials. The same with obstetrics and gynecology. Pediatrics, a lot of the female candidates were interested in that because they felt it was easier for them to raise a family while doing that. And also there were far more job opportunities than for the other specialties. So you can see what at that time, what these undergraduates were looking for. Now, worryingly, across a lot of LMICs, as surgical programs are ramping up, we see lots of places now starting postgraduate training in surgery. The training of anesthesia physicians is not keeping pace. We cannot. We're already at the back, and we're getting even further and further behind. And the onset of this imbalance can be seen in when you look at the students who are interested in a surgical based specialty versus those who would be interested in anesthesia. And the ratios are really massive. So I'll show you that. It actually ranges from 3 people interested in anesthesia to 178 in a surgical specialty in Nigeria. And then it goes all the way to a close, or maybe 2 to 45, 2 to 31. So you can see that we are already really outnumbered. If all of them actually followed their areas of interest, the ratios would be so huge, we as physicians would never be able to close this gap. And that's just at the medical school. Commonly, and the latest study done in South Africa from medical students, anesthesia was described as dull and boring. It was considered stressful. It was very scary. Anesthetists work in the background, can't be seen, receiving no respect from its colleagues. But they also pointed out a couple of things. They said perhaps a longer rotation would do really well for them. They wanted more teaching. They wanted a better understanding of what the specialty of anesthesia actually was about, which clearly they didn't seem to have got. Furthermore, we do find challenges when it comes to our rotation in that training programs are increasing in duration from 5 to 6 years. And that's happening steadily, one university after another. But there is no concomitant increase in the duration of the anesthesia rotation. And then that just cements the recognition of us as a minor rotation versus the majors that get even more time. So what message are we sending to the undergraduate medical student about us? And how do we expect them to want to chase a career in a situation or a specialty which doesn't even seem to be able to get more time to teach what it's about and get them to be more knowledgeable in it? However, even with just 2 weeks of exposure, it has been demonstrated that you can have a change in heart. You can expose these medical students and get them to have a different perception of anesthesia. And this has already been done, as shown in a study in South Africa. And similarly, also in Pakistan, when they changed the way that they taught anesthesia, they were able in 2 weeks to show a change in the number of people who show an interest and consider anesthesia as a specialty career. This makes it imperative for us to ask, how are we implementing this rotation? And are there things that we need to do to make it a more impactful rotation amongst medical students, and hopefully change perception in the process? What would an improved exposure look like? And for sure, already it's been mentioned, that it needs to go beyond just presenting general anesthesia in the operating rooms, which is what everybody does, believes so. And even qualified doctors, qualified specialists who are not anesthetists still view us as primarily being working in the operating room, and that's it, giving anesthesia and intubating patients. We need to demonstrate critical care. We need to demonstrate pain management. And innovatively as well, we need to look at other places in which we do very well. Organizing multidisciplinary teams, being the leaders of patient safety, conducting safe patient handovers, professionalism, communication between teams. Very few people do it like we do. But we are not conveying this message to them. And so they don't see it. However, I do believe, and my colleagues who we worked on this paper too, believe the same thing, that shouldn't we go for a 4-week rotation? Increasing an internship-based rotation from 2 weeks to 2 months demonstrated a massive increase in knowledge. And this what happened in South Africa, where the interns, after a 2-month rotation, said they had a great experience in anesthesia. They appreciated pharmacology and physiology. They found out that there's a great work-life balance. And they also found that the theater environment was actually a very nice place to work. Which is very funny, because that takes us back to some of the things that were said before, where people said they wouldn't like anesthesia because of this. And here we are, when you had a good exposure, suddenly they were seeing a different side to what we can offer as a career. Is it plausible that if we increase the duration of an anesthesia rotation, ran it well, worked to making it a great experience, we would have a different opinion from undergraduates and subsequently change perception? We will be forced to consider that, when should we teach anesthesia? Should we confine it to just 2 weeks, cram everything that we can during that 2-week rotation? Or do we do it longitudinally? Either over the 4th year, intermittently throughout that year, these students will have contact with anesthesiologists, continuously build up a rapport so that even when they come to the anesthesia rotation proper, they already know the anesthesia team, and they've also covered a lot of aspects of it, so that when they actually come to the practical, it makes more sense. It's better understood, it's less scary, and far more enjoyable. Some people have even considered, do you teach anesthesia over the course of 4 years? That's debatable, but some people feel that if you spread the different type of topics, you can actually do that. And again, the content has to change. What is it that you're going to teach? And that might involve resuscitation courses, practical courses, lumbar puncture training, stuff like that, that we do very well, does not actually have to be confined to that 4-year period, and therefore improve the way that we can interact with these students in a more practical way. Now, for this to occur and be impactful, we'll have to require that we participate at the undergraduate curriculum level. Change can only occur if we participate in development of the curriculum. And I think across the board, generally anesthetists do not participate at this level. And consequently, we are always on the back foot because we end up being pushed into a corner. This means that we lose an opportunity to influence innovations in medical student training. There are things that we can offer the average African medical student. There are skills and there is knowledge that we as anesthesiologists can offer the medical student to allow them, to enable them to practice in these isolated places, often with very little supervision. We can give them skills and knowledge that can help them be better doctors. But if we don't participate at the curriculum level, we will miss this opportunity. So that doesn't just involve the anesthesia rotation, but as the doctor, the holistic look, the overall look of a doctor, we miss the opportunity. We, as anesthesiologists, have to also look at it that we have to be role models. Medical students have said across the continent that they look for role models. How do people behave? What do they do? How do they present themselves? How do they interact with other people? And the expectation would be for us as anesthesiologists to demonstrate the range, the scope of what our specialty does or can do, from regional anesthesia to critical care to pain management, new sites. It's on us actually to show that. And then we worry, is lack of interest coming from lack of inspiration from the practitioners? And it is true that we work very hard, we are overwhelmed, and that's something that we have to talk about. Are we so overwhelmed that we only concentrate on the postgrads and then just say, the medical student, well, okay, there's a medical student joining my list. Okay, hello, how are you? And then just keep it at that. And then just concentrate on the postgrad. We may have to have a whole shift in the way we look at it. It is difficult, we are few on the ground, but it's something that we need to think about. Because if we don't, what is the impact overall when we say we need to scale up the numbers? Are we showing these undergrads something that would make them want to join us? Now here's a figure that will show the scale of the problem. So in 2011, there were 169 medical schools in sub-Saharan Africa, graduating 10,000 physicians every year. And this is an absolute underestimate, because 10 years after that, in Kenya alone, there were 1,200 new medical graduates registered by the medical board. So you can see in Kenya alone, the size of the task, what we have to cover, the number of people we can hope to inspire. It's hard work, but what are the rewards if we just interested 10% of 1,200 medical graduates? And even if they don't, we have 1,200 new doctors who can appreciate what anesthetists do. That would change the dynamics in the workplace. But it's a tall order, but we have to start a conversation of how to do it and how to influence these colleagues. The good news is there is evidence that we can turn this around. In Rwanda in 2015, they did a survey amongst medical officers, and they actually found all the perceptions that we've talked about, the negative ones. And what they did was that they came up with measures that targeted medical students, specifically whenever they were doing the anesthesia rotation. And they were able to change their enrollment into their programs from 2 to 4 per year to 9 to 12 per year in 2 years. And this shows that the paradigm can shift in our favor if we look at the undergraduates as a potential resource, as a potential future for our faculty, for our specialty, rather than a troublesome, gum-chewing, long-haired nuisance when you're trying to get your list through. I know it's difficult, but can we start the conversation? There are implications if we don't get this right. The number of surgeons will continue to grow, the number of obstetricians will continue to grow, and the disparity will widen if we don't deal with this. How can we do it? looking at some of the measures that have already been applied from the different reviews from papers across Africa, we seriously need to consider increasing the undergraduate clinical rotation to a duration of at least 1 month, because this should provide an optimum exposure to the student. Now, this may be a long-term goal because it's very difficult to make changes on a 2-week rotation, all of a sudden to go to 4 weeks. It's not easy. We have to go back to the curriculum, as I said, and work from it from there. So that should be a long-term goal. But in the meantime, with the 2 weeks, we need to identify key topics that must be taught in the short time that is availed for this rotation. And that's another discussion that needs to be had. I know there's a group in Rwanda who are actually doing a roundtable Delphi study where they're asking opinions from anesthesiologists on what should we teach the medical student. So we can participate in that and also consider for ourselves what it is we need to do in that time and design an approach for these medical students. We need to encourage faculty and specialists to work beyond the theater room and teach other things, hands-on opportunities to show our skills, resuscitation and simulation and such like. We can do that. And there are things that nobody else that can do better than we can. And that's how we can stand out. But we have to make the time. I know it's difficult, but we need to start talking about this. The attitude of the faculty, as I said, needs to change. So we need to look at these people and encourage them, as long as we consider that they are possibly our future, and no longer look at anesthesia as just a postgraduate course. We need to bring on board our specialist trainees, the registrars, residents, to participate in exposing these undergraduate students into anesthesia. I know it's done in University of Nairobi. I know it's done in the University of Rwanda, where a close bond is built between undergraduates and the resident trainees, registrars. We should also spend time, and I know Dr. Chokwe has been a strong driver in this, is to encourage residents, undergraduate students, to have a closer bond, spend more time in anesthesia. I know we sponsor them to the KSA conference to interact, see that there's a large group of people who are actually having intellectual discussions, spend more time one-to-one, not necessarily during the rotation, but to bring them on board and show them what it is that we do. I mean, it just takes one person to change the mind. Now, if all of us did that, how many people would we be able to influence? We need to frequently track the perception of what medical students think of us and to think of anesthesia as a specialty. Because then that will help us design interventions or thought processes of how we can handle this situation. There has been an increase in the number of people who are applying for anesthesia. We don't know why yet, what the real cause of that is, but it's worth exploring. And if it's something that we need to do more of, then perhaps we need to pursue it. But that requires us to do frequent audits of this, and that's something we can do. But very key here is that we as a specialty need to actually start looking at advocacy directed at the Medical Council and the Commission of Higher Education. Because these two people influence the curriculum and internship training. And if we want to make a change, we have to approach these people, these two entities, and make them aware of what anesthesiologists do, what they can teach a medical student, what impact they can have on a medical officer, and how that kind of interaction can lead to an increase in the number of specialist anesthetists overall, to close the gap of the required number of anesthesiologists that is required in the country and across the continent. We need to go into an advocacy footing. And thank goodness we have KSA, but now we have to think about different roles that we have to pursue. And so maybe that could be part of our discussion after this. So I'd like to consider this a call to action for physician anesthesia providers in Africa in general and in Kenya in particular, to recognize that there is a lost opportunity that has implications for us during the undergraduate rotation. And we have to address this issue about poor perception of our specialty by this very young group of doctors or potential doctors. And we have to be creative about it if we are ever to scale up anesthesia training for doctors with the best quality applicants, not just anybody who wants to come or they want to run away from here or they're just finding a place to park. We want the best people to join our faculty, our specialty. And to do that, it requires us to inspire. But finally, no matter what we do, obviously the vast majority of people will not come to anesthesia, and that's fine. But for the very least, let them leave medical school and go into other specialties, having had a great anesthesia experience, gaining competencies in areas that anesthesiologists are probably the best at teaching and demonstrating, and better to prepare them as medical officers. And even more important is that this interaction that they get with us, when they go to another specialty, they will view us as colleagues worthy of their respect and have a better interpersonal relationship. So not necessarily that we want them to come in as anesthetists or train as anesthetists, but just to be professional doctors who recognize us as professionals with skills and knowledge and abilities to do a good job and care for their patients as well. And thank you very much. That's the end of my presentation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nekyon, for that enlightening presentation. I think we all feel challenged as anesthesia providers to try and drum up interest in the specialty. So next, I'm going to welcome Dr. Zipporah Gathuya to initiate the debate about what we've just had. Welcome, Dr.
Thank you very much. You can hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
Good. I was just thinking as Nekyon was speaking about the 81 or 80 or so people in this meeting today. And I think Chokwe is in the group. Chokwe, are you on the group? Is Dr. Chokwe on the group? He's not even among the 81, but I was just thinking, if all 80 of us influenced half as many people as Dr. Chokwe has influenced to join anesthesia, how many physician anesthesiologists would we have? Just a food for thought, even as you sit there to see how many of you were influenced specifically by that one person, Teacher Tom. And my direction with this is that each one of us can influence people in different ways. And I want us to think outside the box. David has put it very nicely that we have a lot of lost opportunity. How do we work with this? My thoughts are that if you look at where do we get the pool of medical students who come to medical school? It is from high schools. Most of these high schools organize career talks. How many of us as anesthesia providers have gone to do those career talks? So that these people see that there's a group of people called anesthesia providers long before they even come to medical school. If you look at the book by, what's the name of this neurosurgeon? Nekyon, help me.
Ben Carson.
Ben Carson. Most of the students in high school have read that book. So every time when people are going to Form 1, they've done very well, or they've had it quoted somewhere, they want to be neurosurgeons. If you ask them what they know about neurosurgeon, for most of them, it's just that one book in Influence. And I'm just putting these ideas out there so we can discuss, what do you think is our Ben Carson moment as anesthesia providers, so that we can take advantage of these from when kids are small and plant that idea in them as they grow old and as they grow through their careers. The other thing is about our interaction with our colleagues. And this is something that we have to think about very critically, about our work ethics. If we seem to be second-rate physicians because we meet patients in theater, we are not taking part of preparing them, we don't have enough knowledge or perception. So when the medical students are in theater for their other rotations, whether it is surgery or obs-gyn, and they see the anesthesia, is not very sure about what they're doing, or is not very confident about what they are saying, or the surgeon does not regard them very much, decision-making, even when they're not rotating in anesthesia, that tells a lot. If in their rotations in the main specialties, as we call them, pediatrics, internal med, surgery, obs-gyn, they have never seen an anesthesia provider going to review patients and having a real academic discussion. Because sometimes we want to wait until the surgeon says the patients are ready, and then we wait for them in theater. So I think that is another area that we need to think about, that our interaction with these people, other than interacting with them in the anesthesia rotation as we increase the duration and the impact of that rotation, we have a lot of other opportunities when we interact with them when they're doing their major rotations. I want you guys to see what you think about that. What about culture and societal impression? Many people, even our own good colleagues, have no idea what we do. And we are very busy, buried in what we do, that we don't find time to advertise or say or advocate, like David says. Look at the surgeon's diary that was running in the newspaper. And it made people really understand what surgeons, and particularly that particular surgeon, did. Where are the writers in our group that will do a column like that and explain things and make people, COVID has done as well, because now people know there's a specialty called anesthesia and it's very critical. But again, we are being associated with death and critical care. So role modeling is important. We must model to these medical students and younger people, even when they're not going to choose anesthesia. So we model to them a happy life, not an overworked life, not a stressed life, a life of enjoying what we do as anesthesia providers, being there for their functions in medical school, taking part in their discussions, whether it is the French Society or the drama or Christian Union, whatever activities they engage in, we as older people can engage with those and keep telling them, oh, by the way, I do anesthesia. Oh, I am a pediatric anesthesiologist. They're like, so you did pediatrics and then did anesthesia. Then you get an opportunity to explain to them what pediatric anesthesia or anesthesia in general is. So as I open this discussion, and Were will moderate, I want people to think about those few things and see what we can do to make sure that we have more people, we have more influence in the young doctors, and especially in the area of them seeing us as we interact with them, even in their major rotations. Where?
Daktari, thank you very much for those words. I think now I'd like to open the floor for anyone with a comment or an addition on the same. Before we go to the questions of the chat box. Okay, I think we can start with the questions. So the first question is by Dr. Chikofe Idris. Just a moment. So he's asking about anesthesiologists need to be mainstream teachers. Maybe Dr. you'd like to elaborate more on your comment. Dr. Chikofe, you can unmute yourself.
Hi, Teddy.
Hi,
Can you hear
Dr.
me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, mine wasn't actually a question. Mine was just a suggestion, or rather a comment, in the sense that we have a small group of anesthesiologists that do run a course that is outside anesthesia, what is called the Basic Assessment and Support in Intensive Care Medicine. And we tend to interact with medical officers from all over the country. And every time we run the calls, when it comes to the feedback time, they keep on asking us, why aren't you guys mainstream teachers? Because in their early years of undergraduate, they don't meet any anesthetists, like in the physiology class. Maybe now we have a few of us teaching physiology, but they just admire the way we deliver the course. And we actually, move them from, the bench to the bedside. And we demonstrate, decision-making. We demonstrate, basically anesthesia is like quantitative. You show them that there are numbers you can use, then you make a decision, where before that it was unclear as to whether one can go with one decision or the other. So basically, it is just something I was just adding, but that is the feedback we get when we interact, especially now during this course, the basic course. So mine wasn't actually a question. It was just, an addition.
Thank you, Doc. Anyone with a response to that? We can proceed to the next comment. So Marcus Lance is thanking you for the nice presentation and is asking whether we should demonstrate more independence of our surgical colleagues, like in the UK and other regions in Europe. Dr. Nekyon?
Yeah, I'll take that one. It is necessary for us to do that, because I think you saw what happened in the comments that were coming is that we are dependent on surgeons. If surgeons didn't exist, we wouldn't exist. And so there is a lack of view that we are freestanding specialists in our own right. And I think going back to what Dr. Gathuya was saying is that people don't see us standing up to come and do an assessment and have your own opinion. We don't stand up to direct teams. We don't stand up openly to bring teams together. They don't see us doing that. They don't realize that we are the ones who organize the multidisciplinary team meetings. Okay, and so yes, a demonstration of independence is required. What form this should take, I think, varies depending on what kind of health systems we are. But the principle is the same, yes. So I don't know what Professor Marcus Lance wanted to describe as possibly an example of this.
Professor Marcus Lance, would you like to respond to that? Okay,
Where can I say something after Marcus?
Yes, no problem. Marcus? Okay, as we wait for Marcus, Dr. Gathuya, you can go ahead.
Yes, I'm really very passionate about this idea of independence. The only way we'll make independence is if we take the route that David said, that we and patients that are involved in pre-op assessment, post-op assessment, preparation of patients for theater actively. And then people will realize that the nurses and even the medical students and other people will realize that we are adding positive value to the care of the patient. Unfortunately, the way our system is set up, most of the time, we get to have patients on the table where decisions have been made. They've been told, oh, you'll only have a little anesthesia. So I think there is a very, very big role, and this will come from the science of patient preparation and administration of that anesthesia, where the decisions that is made with us as equal partners, not as lesser partners, and with mutual respect to each other. I remember when I worked in Kenyatta, and people used to wonder a lot about the level 3 lists. And we would go there and spend time, sometimes even preparing patients like the nephrostomas. For many weeks, people don't understand what you're doing, but you're there looking at the labs, looking at what, and actually being the one to tell the surgeons, I think now we are ready to go, and then they can make the list. And I know there's a lot of that, like now that is developing in the teams like cardiothoracic, or these places where they're having multidisciplinary team meetings to decide about anesthesia or surgical care for patients. And I think this is a good place to start. And especially for complex cases, I think it is important for us to have those discussions with our surgical colleagues and the physicians, whether pediatricians or internal med people, so that we maintain the safety of the patients for everybody. So I think that way, where people see us as people who are using science to make decisions, people who are equal on the negotiating table in terms of especially the very difficult patients, and where even the other parts of the team realize that here the anesthesia calls the shots or calls the day, whether we are going to operate or not. I think that is a very good way of demonstrating independence. As to what Marcus has said, in most of the anesthesia form practice groups. And then you, as a practice group, you go and approach a particular hospital or provider and decide we will handle all your anesthesia requirements. And then within your team, you decide who does what. We are not there yet. I don't think that we'll be there in another while, but I think it's a discussion we need to start having, even as we go forth. One of the other things from the numbers that David gave, if you look at the numbers, most of the physicians and even non-physician anesthesia providers are concentrated in the big cities and big towns. So even as you look at those ratios, you find that if you remove the urban centers, the numbers really look bad for the rest of the country. So, and most of the people who go to the periphery may not be very strong in decision making, and they'll get cowed by the rest of the team if they're not working as teamwork. How do we as KSA support those colleagues of ours who have taken the blunt and decided to go and work in the periphery for one reason or another, and support and advocate for our profession across the country, so that then most people imagine that anesthesia, we are very big-headed because our work is just to counsel patients. How do we work on the culture to change that perception so people realize that we are not just counseling patients for the sake of, we are actually worried about their patient safety? What about our culture where we used to say, that if a patient crosses over from public to private with the same parameters that you had canceled on the other side, you would proceed and do it. We have a lot to work within ourselves for us to gain the respect that we desire, but I think we have started and we are way up, but we must keep up the pace. And science, because science doesn't lie, will be our best bet on that.
Thank you, Dr. for those comments. Next question is from Dr. Umani, who's asking what are the specific objectives that undergraduates are supposed to know in the anesthesia specialty? Are YouTube anesthesia channels good to teach medical students on anesthesia? Dr. Nekyon?
Yeah, that's a good one. I think that exactly what is happening in Rwanda, where they are having a round table to discuss and they ask the stakeholders, what do you think we should teach this medical student? That is a conversation that we need to have. And we look at what is out there. We only have 2 weeks to teach these people. Some places they're 4 weeks, but let us first sit down and decide ourselves what it is that we need to teach them. So I think let's do that as a group. Number 2, YouTube channels do have a lot of information, but they have to be part of a framework. You don't simply tell a student, go look at this and you'll find it on YouTube. It has to be part of a framework. So if a rotation has a combination of things, which is hands-on practical, observation, simulation, classroom teaching, plus YouTube videos, then you've got a much better picture, but not just YouTube videos in isolation.
Thank you, Doc, for that.
Good.
So, Dr. Lee Ngugi, maybe you can unmute yourself and elaborate on your point. Dr. Lee Ngugi. So you're asking, he's asking whether is it time or duration of rotation or breadth of practice? In leading edge hospitals, it's estimated about 60% of patients interact with anesthesia providers, from the usual OR service to critical care, leading pain teams in the wards and A&E, inter and intra-hospital transfer of critical patients, both air, land, epidural pain service in the labor wards, leading resuscitation training and practice, chronic pain service, sedation service in the cath lab, radiology and A&E, gastro suits, dental etc., lead QI teams etc. Where this happens, anesthesia training is highly sought after and very competitive. Maybe Dr. Gathuya, would you like to take this one?
Okay, thank you. And this is what I was talking about, knowledge, perception, and impression. A lot of decisions by the young doctors is about what they know, what they perceive, and what impresses them. So from a knowledge point of view, we have agreed from David's discussion that it's not a lot. If you're having 2 weeks rotation, then they probably do not have a lot of knowledge about anesthesia per se. But when they interact with the anesthesia providers in the same line as I was saying about in their main rotations, whether you're going to give labor epidural or pain service, the way they look at you as the person, they're like, wow, that central line just went in like that. The way we have spent hours here looking for a line, you know, those kind of impressions. What do they perceive you as? Very, like Idris says, once you interact with them, they see you're good teachers, you're good-hearted, you're humble, in all the aspects that they interact with. You're empathetic when you're coming to see a critically ill patient or you're transporting them. That is very, very key into drawing people into anesthesia. So you need to think about, in whatever area that you're at as anesthesia providers, it's like you're selling our profession. So if you're complaining about how you think you're downtrodden, if you're complaining about unpleasant working hours, if you're complaining about all those things that create a perception that is negative, like David brought out in the discussion, then this has a multiplier effect. Imagine this medical student who interacted with, let's say, somebody like Idris for the first time, and they were teaching them, then they were in ICU, and he fixed a central line very quickly and went patient stabilized. They are in awe, they want to do that, as opposed to somebody else comes and they're like, oh, you know, why am I always the ones being called to fix central lines? These people need to fix their own lines, and they're complaining. Do they think I'm a phlebotomist? All those things. Now, if you take the same medical student and expose them to those two people, you can tell that most likely the one who interacted with a more positive person is more likely to be drawn to the profession than the one who interacted with a negative person. So we must remember, even as we are talking about advocacy, that we are the first advocates for our profession. We are the frontliners for our profession. We are the ones people see and they think, oh, I want to be like Dr. Gathuya for whatever reason. And then maybe sometimes they haven't even known that you're an anesthetist. Then now when you say you do anesthesia, they feel very happy. Even me, I want to do anesthesia. So I think it is important, like has been said, that in all the areas that we work that are outside the main operating rooms, that we shall be advocates, that we shall demonstrate knowledge and impress those people so that they can now start digging deeper into what this anesthesia is all about, in a way like being a role model for these people in everything that we do. Back to you, Teddy.
Thank you, Dr. Next question is from Dr. Nganga, who asked representation at the national government level might help too, for instance, by availing more anesthesia-guided sponsorships. Dr. Nekyon?
I wonder about that, because I think, again, we are putting the cart before the horse. Because I think we need to make sure that we have the best candidates wanting to apply in the first place. Because remember, we used to have a situation where there were more training spots than applicants. And then you take everybody just because you have to. We need to be in a situation where there are more applicants than positions, because then we get the best coming into the specialty. So yes, it's good to have the guarded sponsorships, but the trainees have to come from somewhere, which is the whole point of this talk. Where are these applicants going to come from? We have to inspire people to apply in the first place. I'd love to hear other comments on this from everyone else.
I can make a comment on that. A while back, we had one person in Afya House who was very keen on anesthesia training. And I would say that they really impacted on the number of physician anesthesia training by just those guided sponsorships. And we are truly grateful to Dr. Kimani as the Anesthesia Society. And out of those ones, we have some very good ones, because I think most doctors who are passionate about their patients will make good anesthesia providers, and a lot of the skills we learn are given. So I wouldn't be so anti those guided sponsorships, but we really also need to sell our positions so that we get, like David says, people who are interested, not people who are being forced there because that is the only training sport that doesn't have competition. But it goes both ways. It can be helpful, and on the other hand, we can get all the rejects.
Thank you, Doc. Next comment from Dr. Madangani. If anesthesia were unhitched from the daunting and depressing critical care, would it spark more interest in the field?
I think Mark Gashi makes a comment just below that could address that. Mark, are you there?
Okay.
Yes. Sorry. I got stuck on my microphone.
Yeah, you actually addressed that comment.
Yeah, actually, I think.
Yeah.
I think that the issues with our critical care units are very complex. But what inspires a young doctor, a student, is, especially the students, is when they see somebody who is professional, who understands the physiology, the pharmacology, who uses evidence-based medicine, medical practice, and then they see a patient getting better, a patient who is like intubated, very ill, some support, and they see that patient getting better. Then again, that brings out the issue of time. You know, they have to have enough time in the unit to be able to see this transformation. Otherwise, if they just spend a couple of days, they just be seeing, like, you know, very, very ill patients who seem like hopeless cases, but they don't see the turnaround that happens later on. So actually, I don't think that ACU is that daunting. It's just that in our setup, there are so many other confounding factors in our ACU that sometimes make it look discouraging.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gashi. Dr. Mwiti.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. First of all, let me thank you, Dr. Nekyon and Dr. Gathuya, for facilitating this and for those nice for that nice coverage of this topic. First of all, I want to say that I coordinate the 2-week rotation in where I work, and we have a very structured program that entices students to go beyond the 2 weeks, that they have objectives and goals that they can meet way after the 2 weeks, being that we look at what would be the needs of the student, what the needs of the student would be, either as a awesome doctor, as Dr. Nekyon has discussed, or as a future, as person who would be interested in anesthesia in the future. So we have a set of objectives that I would share with Dr. Kevin Umani if he's interested. And then the other thing that I've noticed with time is that we've generated quite a lot of interest, and we get quite a number of people coming for interviews, but then we don't have slots. So my plea is that as the CANESCA thing goes on, we need to open up these training sites so that we can at least keep these people who are interested and are very, very good students. Thank you.
Could I ask you, Dr. Mwiti, if you don't mind, Nekyon here?
Yes.
Why do you think you're getting more applicants?
I think it's from we have a structured mentorship and that structured rotation that we have, and plus what Dr. Choko has done over time, and that has of course filtered to the rest. And also I must also recognize the role of our residents, and I've seen Dr. Ben Olo here with us for the critical role that they have played in this aspect. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mwiti. Next comment is from Michelle Sanor, who thanks Dr. Nekyon for the nice presentation. She also agrees with making the rotation longer. It allows more interaction in anesthesia and changes perception. So she's a 5th year MBCHB student, and the rotation in anesthesia and critical care goes for 6 weeks. I didn't have interest in the specialty as we began the rotation, but right now in the 5th week, my perception has greatly changed on what the specialty entails. And that changed when I stepped into the ICU and I saw how the specialty comes in handy. And the anesthetist consultants and the doctors I have met have inspired me greatly. I am now convinced to consider anesthesia as a specialty.
Thank you very much. And I think that just makes my point exactly, is that if we work to inspire the next generation and put a bit more effort and attention to this group, we can actually turn this situation around to a point where we have far more applicants than places than we could ever accommodate. And so I'm really inspired to see that comment from her, and congratulations to the people who have been teaching her and exposing her to anesthesia. And I hope they'll continue to do the same.
So, Dr. Gathuya, any closing comments as we wind up?
No, there's one more comment up there from Dr. Gisheru about advocacy.
Okay, yes. What would be the role of advocacy and social media campaigns, especially from KSA?
I don't know if the chair of KSA is here. Do you think, is Dr. Okello here?
Dr. Okello?
Yes, Dr. Nekyon.
Yeah, hi, Steve. I don't know what we could do about this.
As you said, I think it's important that we approach this together. It cannot be a one-man show. And I do agree with Dr. Gisheru that as a society, we need to go beyond. If you remember, the theme of our conference this year was basically beyond the 4 walls. And I think this talk aptly covers part of what we should go out to do as anesthesiologists, not just for the sake of our profession, but for the sake of patient care. I do believe we are much better placed at looking at this holistically. And I think we will work with the various committees of the society to explore other ways of achieving these objectives. I also happen to be a teacher, and I think Michelle is one of my students. In Maseno, we have actually it's a 6-week rotation. And I must say that when most of the students come into anesthesia for the first time, you can see how scared they are on the face. But I didn't know that they're actually enjoying it, and I'm happy to be associated with them. As KSA, with these challenges coming, and I think this is the importance of having some of these talks, with such challenges, it gives us opportunities to venture into. I'm not going to take so much of time because I can see Teacher Tom's hand is up. Maybe I'll allow him to say something. But as KSA, I think we are committed to ensure that the care we deliver to our patients, not just in anesthesia, but across the whole medical spectrum, is up to standard. Thank you for the presentation, Dr. Nekyon, and back to you, Dr. Teddy. I can see Teacher Tom's hand is up. Maybe he wants to say something.
Okay, Dr. Chokwe.
Yeah, good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Yeah, I was listening in the background, but Dr. Mwiti has insisted that I must say something. I'm not sure what else to say.
I called you out and you refused to answer. Thank you, Chokwe.
I'm sorry, I had lost network at that point. So I had to get onto another line for this. Sorry about that. It's interesting to talk about anesthesia education in this country and the work that Dr. Nekyon has presented to start with as a beginning. One, people somewhere else did not think it was important to discuss African perspectives in anesthesia, and Dr. Nekyon will tell you the frustration we've gone through to actually get this work out there, recognized and understood. Secondly, education is not as easy and enticing as many people would consider. and getting people into the academic space to inspire, especially the undergraduates with limited time and everything else to spend their time and emotion and produce the future group of anesthesiologists has been a very big challenge. And even worse, the fact that we work in a space of people in the academic atmosphere who do not believe anesthesia is anything to work through. You saw what we went through in the last 3 years at the University of Nairobi, for example, when the whole department was scrapped, mixed together with the Department of Surgery, Orthopedics, and everything else. And we kept quiet, and they suddenly realized that anesthesia would require to come back in a different perspective, because in every other university, they used to say, there is no independent anesthesia department, so why do you want to have one? So when we had one, the rest of the things followed in the rest of the places. I have been examining in different universities, and what Okello has done in Kisumu is amazing. Gathuya and the team in Eldoret, both at undergraduate level and starting postgraduate studies. People in NKU, KU, and the rest of the spaces have inspired a lot of people. And indeed, as what Dr. Miti is saying, when we have a capacity, for example, for 5 to 7 students coming to train in MMed, and we get 50 to 60 applicants, it's an overwhelming response, which even the capacity and the facilities that we are given probably will not accommodate them. And indeed, the spaces the rest of you have offered us in terms of electives in the different hospitals have enabled us to spread this even further, because even our students, with their interaction on those elective spaces, have seen the capacity that we can build for anesthesia. At the national level, that's a different conversation. Dr. Kabeto has tried for the longest time possible. It might not come to fruition tomorrow or the day after, but indeed people have noticed what we have done. You probably have not spoken about what happened during COVID last year. And that was one of the major things that Dr. Chikofi and the team inspired the rest of this country. All we had was the viral loads and the number of cases that were happening. But from all the hospitals that have been running some quasi ICUs and the likes, anesthesia featured majorly at that particular point in level. And even for the level of the non-physician practitioners, you have seen even within our programs, people who have done all those programs and yet come back into medicine, and not only come back into medicine, but come and specialize further as the MMed programs and beyond in anesthesia. That tells you there's something that is happening there. There are a lot of opportunities outside, but we must make them available. And the rest of you must also be available, not just in speech to ask where the students are coming from, but to be able to work with them. A challenge, for example, I will give, that each and every one of practitioners who have spent more than 5 years in practice picks one medical student from the area they practice from and come with them to the conference next year. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Choke, for those words. I think in the event of time, I'd like, unless there's one last comment or addition. Oh, I'm just seeing there's another comment from Dr. Ngugi. In the future, longer or shorter rotations? So many new specialties have come up over the years, all want more time to interact with undergrads, and projected to double specialties in a few years. I think we'll take this as the last question. Anyone who can comment on this? Dr. Nekyon, Dr. Gathuya?
Yeah, I think that as a specialty, we've been denied time. So we do need more time. The reason why we got little time is people didn't realize what it is that we can do and what we can give. For us to be able, and remember, anesthesia touches all departments. Every single department interacts with anesthesia, whether they like it or not. And therefore, we are actually, in a way, we are in the middle of a wheel, surrounded by all these other new specialties that Lee Ngugi is talking about. They're just adding spokes around our wheel. And therefore, it is not incorrect to think that we need more time for our specialty to show what we can do and also shape these doctors to be able to do those new specialties that they're talking about. And the new specialties also tend to be hubs on others. So it's a new type of surgery, a new type of internal medicine, a new type of, and those are served by the majors already. So therefore, I would say that we still need more time. You can already see the effect that it's had on the doctor in her 5th year right now. We have to fight for that time. It's going to be difficult, but we have to fight for it and get it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nekyon. I also wanted to add my voice there and say that we have opportunity to interact with these students throughout even their other rotations. What we probably need Mweti and Chokwe to help us do is to share the objectives and maybe as part of the KSA, one of the tracks, discuss how to deliver these objectives to the medical students as we interact with them in their other rotations. So that if they're internal medicine and they're looking after a diabetic patient who we are going to take to theater, we know we can interact with them at that level. That way, even as we get more scheduled time for anesthesia, we have this other flowery time that we have a focused way of impacting them. Because I think for Chokwe it just comes naturally. For most of us, maybe not. How do we leverage? And like I had said in the beginning, when Chokwe said he was offline, if each one of us impacted half or even of the students that Chokwe has impacted as a person, we would be very, very far. So how do we like formalize those informal interactions in the other rotations to grow interest? And I think Mweti will probably, maybe in one of the KSA sessions, share with us how we can go about that. And I think that will go a long way in us taking the time where we are scrabbling for all the added specialties like Dr. Lee says, but actually maximizing on our impact as anesthesia for these students throughout their course, even in the not formal time allocated to anesthesia. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Because it's now 7:19, I think we'll leave it at that. I would like to thank you, Dr. Nekyon and Dr. Gathuya, for this illuminating presentation that has stimulated a lot of debate and conversation. I would like to thank all the participants for the comments and making this presentation interactive. I'd also like to thank Bernice from KSA for the work that she's done behind the scenes. The next CME will be a physical CME that will be held on the 13th of October. The topic and the venue will be communicated in due course. And with that, I'd like to draw this CME to a close, and people can leave at their own pleasure. Thank you everyone, and have a good night.
You too. Thanks everybody.
Thank you very much and good night.
Thank you. Yeah, good night. Thank you.